Dynasty Corner!
What's up, everyone? I'm your host, Matthew Cahan, with my partner, Charlie Chemers today. And today we're going to be talking about the top 20 Dynasty quarterbacks in fantasy football. Before we start, make sure to follow us on all of our social medias at Leatherbrains. Especially make sure to like and hit the subscribe button on our YouTube. Let's get right into it. So we got our top 20 Dynasty quarterbacks. Like I said, Charlie and I both made our top 20 rankings and then took the average of both of them to make our combined cumulative top 20 list. So we're going to start right at the top. We got tiers for everyone. We got about 5 tiers today. So we'll start off with the number one quarterback on our list. Charlie, I'll give you the reins here because I know this is your guy. You had him at number one. Who's our number one?
Yeah, we were tough. It was close between Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson because we both had them back-to-back 1 and 2, but I had Jaden Daniels number one. We ended up flipping a coin for the result to see who would break the tie. Jaden Daniels is our number one quarterback, but we've got a decent tier for our first 3 quarterbacks where we've got Jaden Daniels number one, easy, Lamar Jackson number 2, also really easy. And then coming in at number 3, Josh Allen. And that makes up our first tier of dynasty quarterbacks. These guys are all elite assets. Like if you have one of these guys on your team, they're going to put up crazy fantasy numbers on top of being youthful. You know, you're still getting, I mean, that's why Jaden Daniels is our number one. He is one of the youngest quarterbacks in the NFL, along with being one of the most athletic quarterbacks in the NFL. When you combine those two things and the success that he had in his rookie season, there's no reason not to put him in this top tier of quarterback.
Yeah, Jaden Daniels, I was contemplating between him and Lamar at one. With Jaden Daniels, what he was able to do in his rookie year, already being a top 5 fantasy quarterback as a rookie with only one true weapon in Terry McLaurin. He's throwing to Olamide Zaccheaus, washed up Zach Ertz, then Austin Eckler. So what he was able to do with that and now adding Deebo Samuel to the mix, he should be in line for another monster season. I think Josh Allen's an interesting guy here because he could easily be number one on this list, in my opinion. He finishes number 2 fantasy quarterback last year, and he's great every single year. Obviously, he has the rushing upside. He had 15 rushing touchdowns last year. So I think that he easily, like, we could come back a year from today and say Josh Allen's the number one quarterback on this list. But for now, I feel like these are easily the top 3 when you consider the rushing upside, compared to the guys right below them.
Right. These are easily the top 3 because of exactly what you're saying, the rushing upside. That's the most important thing. And even further, talking about upside in general, that's probably why we have Jaden Daniels and Lamar ahead of Josh Allen, at least at this point. You know, Jaden Daniels has got the age, but Jaden Daniels and Lamar are combining for a ton of carries every game. You're getting that floor in fantasy, and these are automatic guys. Like, we know that these 3 guys, if they're not injured, they're going to end up inside the top 5 quarterbacks at the end of the season because of what they bring to the table through the air and through the ground. Quarterbacks are the easiest position to predict, and you can definitely find value in these later quarterbacks. You're gonna be able to run with streamers and later round guys that are gonna help you in especially your super flex leagues, but you cannot absolutely go wrong with these top 3 guys because they are next level.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I had Lamar Jackson as my number one quarterback on this list just because,
Oh, he's so
while
good.
he's not as youthful as Jaden Daniels, where Jaden Daniels sits at 24, Lamar is still under the age of 30. So with Lamar being a little bit robbed of MVP, but statistically was the fantasy MVP last season, he's just going to be putting up monster numbers every single season. His passing has improved dramatically from a couple years back, and he's just going to be an elite fantasy asset. And all these guys will in the top 3. So I'd say if you're more of a competitive team and you're trying to win this year, I would value Lamar Jackson a little bit higher than Jaden Daniels
Definitely
just
Lamar.
because he's going to be better most likely this coming year. But Daniels does have a couple of years on him. The Commanders are going to go through some different cycles with different players. Who knows what weapons they're going to be adding. So Daniels obviously a very exciting player to have, in that tier. But let's move on to our second tier here. We have Joe Burrow as our number 4 quarterback. Now, I had him personally in my first tier as my fourth quarterback. And I like Joe Burrow a lot because he's just able to dissect defenses. He's, in my opinion, probably the best pocket passer in the NFL right now. Maybe Matthew Stafford, but Joe Burrow is probably number one in that regard. He just threw for 4,500 yards. He's going to be doing that pretty much every season. He's got the best receiver in the league by his side. So I'd say with his talent and with his youth and his big game ability, where he could easily go out there and throw for 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, I would personally put him in that first tier with those other guys.
I struggle to put him in that first tier. And to me, Joe Burrow is the second best quarterback in the NFL. I think for sure Lamar is the number one quarterback in the NFL, and I'm throwing Joe Burrow up there second. But that doesn't mean that he has to have the same dynasty fantasy football value as the other quarterbacks, even if he is the second best quarterback. I would personally put Jalen Hurts ahead of Joe Burrow in terms of fantasy because you're getting the rushing upside to me is so much more important. And the thing with Joe Burrow is we saw some crazy fantasy football numbers this past year, but it still wasn't even comparable, I feel like, to a guy like Lamar Jackson in terms of I think Joe Burrow is going to have some passing regression statistically, not because he's going to be playing worse, but statistical regression in terms of if the defense is playing better next season, he's not going to need to do as much. He's not going to need to put up as big of numbers. He's not going to throw for, 45 touchdowns and whatnot. I think it's much more plausible that we just see Joe Burrow, as one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, throwing for consistently high 30s of touchdowns to the low 40s of touchdowns. And it just might not produce the same fantasy output as what you're going to see from a Jalen Hurts and the guys we mentioned in the top tier. So that just kind of keeps him out for me. But I mean, do you have Jalen Hurts as your next guy then,
Yeah, I
Gahan?
have Hurts as my quarterback 5, and I agree with you. Hurts could easily be over Burrow. I just trust I trust Burrow way more as an elite asset
That's
as a
fair.
quarterback. Like Jalen Hurts could easily go out there and have a stinker of a game. He only threw for 18 passing touchdowns, and he's going to get all the tush pushes in the world. But if you are looking on more than just a 2 to 3 year scale, who knows how good the offensive line, the offense is going to be. Whereas with Joe Burrow, I know he's going to throw for 4,500 yards every single season. And with Hurts, it's a lot more reliant on, the number of rushing touchdowns he's getting right here. But I do think with his rushing ability, he absolutely is in the second tier. And then the other guy, Patrick Mahomes, we both have him at quarterback 6. It's the obvious play because any given season, he could easily go out there and be the quarterback 1. He could throw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns. He's done it before. So right now, he's had a couple of mediocre seasons to his standard as of late. But Rashee Rice coming back next year, Xavier Worthy, year 2, Travis Kelce coming back for a farewell tour. Mahomes could easily creep back up into that top 3, I think.
Yeah, it is really interesting that we have Jalen Hurts in this tier with Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes specifically because he really is sandwiched between two guys that can be legendary quarterbacks. I mean, Patrick Mahomes has already earned that status, but the way Joe Burrow plays on the field, I am really comfortable saying that he's approaching on legendary status. And maybe it's not, legendary status as in, oh, he's a top 20 quarterback of all time, but the way he plays on the field can genuinely be within that, long-term franchise quarterback idea of we saw Ben Roethlisberger have so much success for so long, and Joe Burrow's genuinely in that category already. And you're not exactly there yet with Jalen Hurts. I know he just won the Super Bowl and he's been there twice, which is very commendable, but I'm still not completely convinced that Jalen Hurts is in it for the long haul as a dominating quarterback in the NFL. Whereas with Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes specifically, they're in this tier because they are legendary quarterbacks, not because they're going to be great fantasy football quarterbacks. You're going to be able to have these guys for almost a decade on your roster, on your dynasty rosters, Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. Jalen Hurts, maybe not. He might only be fantasy relevant for the next 4, 5, 6 years, which is going to be different from Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. So it's a really interesting tier that we have here for sure.
Right. I mean, you usually take things in dynasty with 3 to 4 year scope. So I wouldn't think too much into
That's
that.
why
And I
Hurts is
think
here.
that's why we have him in this tier, like you said. But I think we can all agree Hurts is not to the level of Mahomes or Burrow in real life, but with the rushing upside and how great this offense is looking, there's no reason that he shouldn't be in there. And he's had great finishes in fantasy before, so he definitely deserves it. But moving on to our tier 3, which is where it gets very interesting. It's where Charlie and I's list really starts to differ from, these next 7, 8 quarterbacks. So we have Bo Nix at quarterback 7. I believe you have him at quarterback 7. Bo Nix finished as the quarterback 7 in his rookie year. He had a terrific year with, again, almost no weapons, similar to Jaden Daniels. The Broncos had a really good season. Could he be in for, a nice sophomore slump? I definitely think it is possible, but similar to the top guys, he has shown a lot of rushing upside, which gives the hope for him to be a consistent top 10 quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Bo Nix, but I do think we got to open this up to the next two guys that we have in addition because it's the three rookies. We've got Bo Nix at 7, we've got Caleb Williams at 8, and Drake May at number 9. And these three guys are all making a name for themselves in the NFL already. I'm very confident in the fantasy output that these guys are capable of, specifically because with Bo Nix, we've seen it already. We know that he's going to go out there and scramble. We know that he's going to make big throws and he's going to fit inside of Sean Payton's offense well. And that's something that as a dynasty manager, I'm comfortable tagging myself along with. Now, if I'm in a startup draft, I might not want to be taking these guys as, the quarterback 7, 8, 9 off the board. I'd want to see if I could get them later because we have other guys in this tier and we have other guys later that I might like more in terms of draft value and opportunity cost. But these guys are elite in terms of what they can eventually bring in fantasy value. Bo Nix, we already saw it. Caleb Williams is an elite prospect coming out of USC as a number 1 pick in the NFL. He's an elite prospect that we can see some game on the ground. It's going to be some great fantasy output from him next year. And then Drake May, I also believe we already saw it because he's one of the most run-heavy quarterbacks out of these three that we saw, and all of them have incredible scrambling ability already.
All right, yeah. Let's stop talking about Caleb Williams as a prospect as if he didn't have 4,000 total yards and like 6 interceptions in his rookie year. It's just because Jaden Daniels went out there and had a great year, and Bo Nix also had a really good year, doesn't mean that Caleb Williams, under the worst coach in the NFL voted by the players, still had a terrific rookie year, in my opinion. But you had Nix at 7. I had Caleb at 8, and I'm not sure where you had Caleb, but for me, with Ben Johnson coming in, it's all about upside here. He has the rushing upside on every game, but I also think you're betting on the fact that the Bears offense is going to improve a lot. Caleb has 2 really good receivers. Who knows what they're going to be doing in the draft, but you can definitely bet that the offensive line throughout the offseason is going to improve. I think with these 3 guys, the clear outlier in my eyes for like next year would be Drake May, just because I'm very unclear about what the Pats are going to do regarding the wide receiver room. There's been some rumors about potentially trading for Brandon Ayuk, potentially trading for A.J. Brown if he became available, things like that. But until they really bring in even one weapon, I just can't trust Drake May for next year. So at that point, I'd rather just get a guy like Caleb or Bo Nix, who I think could give me top 10 value next season.
It's no hate to Caleb Williams. It's just we're talking about fantasy football, not real life NFL football right now. And in that scope of things, I know what I'm getting out of Bo Nix and Drake May in terms of their rushing upside, and that is what just propels them slightly ahead for me than Caleb Williams. I have Caleb Williams as my quarterback 10, so I'm still very confident that he's going to be an extremely successful NFL quarterback, but I love the way that Bo Nix moves and the way that he's able to get fantasy points and be a dominating part of that offense in terms of he's going to score rushing touchdowns. You're going to get rushing touchdowns out of it, and he's going to be used in creative ways. Now I'm excited to see what Ben Johnson brings to the Bears organization to see how they can utilize Caleb Williams' athleticism. But Caleb Williams, to me, is more of a pocket passer than both Drake May and Bo Nix. And with the opportunity that's given to the rushing upside in Bo Nix and Drake May, I'm taking those guys over Caleb Williams in dynasty startups, at least right now.
I mean, yeah, he's a better pocket passer because he just is a better passer than those guys, at least just throwing mechanics. But I don't know. I think these guys are all good. You could argue Williams over Nix and Williams over May. I've seen a lot of people that have May over both of them. I've seen people that
Right.
have Nix over both of them, like you. And there, I think you could kind of go either way. They all have a lot of upside, and I do like them in this
They're all
tier.
right there.
But looking on to the last two guys in this tier, we have Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud coming in at number 10 and 11 here. So Trevor Lawrence, we can start out with him. I have him as my quarterback 13, so a little bit lower than you have him, which is surprising because I'm very high on him. I always have been. I'm just it's hard for me to put him ahead of these guys just because of the lack of success that he's had in some of these years. Now he does go out there and throw consistently for 4,000 yards when he plays a full season, but until I really see the interceptions lower a little bit and the touchdowns go up, I just don't know if I can move him ahead of some of those guys that we just mentioned. But you have Trevor Lawrence in your top 10, so you obviously believe heavy in the Liam Cohen offense coming into this year.
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence is my quarterback 9. I have him in between Drake May and Caleb Williams, and where I see it as just Caleb Williams compared to Trevor Lawrence, they're both elite prospects coming out of college. And I feel like they've both had tremendous success already in the NFL without being, the star that they were supposed to be. I think they've had a lot of success. And that to me is what has bumped Trevor Lawrence above Caleb Williams, and where I put them both right there, at least as my 9 and 10, where I see these guys are elite prospects and they're finally in the situation that they need to be in to explode. And that's why these two guys are, I think, great targets in dynasty startup drafts, great targets to trade for, Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence, because now they finally have what I believe is the coach that's going to push them forward to being the player that they were supposed to be when they were coming out. And that's what's honestly most interesting about CJ Stroud, where I have CJ Stroud as my quarterback 13, and I'm honestly feeling low on him, but he's already come out as, potentially a star quarterback in the NFL to have on your team. But it just worries me for fantasy about CJ Stroud.
I'm not worried at all. I have him at quarterback 7. I have him really high, and I could easily lower him. That's just based on the ceiling of these other guys. Because I agree, their ceiling is higher than his in terms of like Williams, May, Nix. Their ceiling is all higher than his on a season to season basis, just with the rushing upside. But CJ Stroud is 23 years old. He's a great alpha wide receiver one. I think they're going to add another receiver in the first round this year. I just trust the fact that CJ Stroud can go out there for the next 12 years and just be a great player. And if he does that, he might only have a few, top 3, top 5 finishes, whatever that might be if his career goes to plan, but I think he'll be a pretty consistent for most of his career, 7 to 11 range for your quarterback, and he'll be very consistent, which some people don't like as much, but I think when you have an elite gunslinger like Stroud, where he's just going to continue, he's going to have huge games, similar to how I have Joe Burrow really high. It's the same way with Stroud, except Burrow just has been able to produce a little bit more than Stroud to this point.
Oh, I just can't trust the fantasy output. The upside that you're mentioning to me is just so important at the quarterback position. I mean, we're going to be going over our top players and rankings for all of the fantasy positions. This is only the quarterbacks episode. And my philosophy at quarterback, at least, is I want that week to week upside. I want my quarterback to be able to go off, at least in single quarterback leagues for sure, where I know that I can have a replacement level quarterback that would come in and can easily outscore CJ Stroud any given week just because they could run the ball instead of passing the ball. In a super flex league, I definitely would take more of a risk averse approach. And that would probably bump CJ Stroud up in my eyes because you are going to be getting him for a while. He's going to have a higher chance of retaining value year over year versus a Drake May. Because if Drake May comes out next year and he starts playing poorly and it's his rushing floor isn't enough to, bring up his value to keep him on the field consistently, then he's going to drop in the dynasty rankings. I mean, we saw with Anthony Richardson last season where Anthony Richardson was touted in the dynasty community as you got to get this guy, mid to late round in drafts because it's an incredible opportunity to have this rushing upside. And then he freaking sucked. He sucked his ass off the field, and got pulled off, and then, now we're stuck here where Anthony Richardson plummeted in the dynasty rankings because he didn't have that backbone like you were talking about of a CJ Stroud being just such a good quarterback in general.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just a believer in the talent, and I agree with you. In a one quarterback league, he definitely is a little bit worse just because he doesn't provide that week to week upside, and there's going to be so many quarterbacks available that can give you similar numbers. But in a super flex league or two quarterback, whatever it might be, I do think he's just a great player to have on a year to year basis. But let's go on to our next tier here. Got our tier 4 players. Starting out, we got our top two, Justin Herbert and Jordan Love. Me and you had Love in a very similar spot, but Herbert, I had him in my top 10. I have him at quarterback 9. And I'd say my main belief for that is the belief in the Jim Harbaugh offense. Herbert looked a lot better last year than he had in years past. They're going to be adding a receiver, most likely on the outside this year. I've seen some rumors with Devontae Adams. I've seen, rumors of Matthew Golden in the draft. Herbert's just a gunslinger, and there's going to be a lot of touchdown opportunities in this offense. And he did show the ability to run for a lot of touchdowns, but I was a little surprised with how low you had him.
See, I was almost going to use the same reasoning as you just used to show why I think he should be lower. And it's that Jim Harbaugh offense where he's coming in and his coaching staff is going to want to run the ball consistently. And I do truly believe that for years to come. I think they will continue building the offensive line so that they will always have a dominant run game and always focus on the run game. And me personally, I have a little grudge still held out with Justin Herbert just of how I saw him as a prospect. I from watching him in the NFL, I have not seen everything that I want to see. I know how you mentioned him being a gunslinger, but I haven't seen enough, Josh Allen capabilities where he can make any throw while moving, while doing all these crazy things and also have the athleticism. I see a lot of mistakes. I see a lot of miscues when he throws the ball down the field and gunslings too often to the point where I'm uncomfortable having as my fantasy quarterback. And I've seen Jim Harbaugh, try to rein him in. I'm confident that the Chargers will be good and that Herbert is a credible quarterback and a franchise quarterback for them because Jim Harbaugh is such a good head coach. But I'm not confident in him, letting him loose and letting the reins off so that Justin Herbert can be the quarterback he thinks he should be. And instead, he's more of just a mid-level fantasy quarterback in my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with mistakes because it's fantasy football. So if he throws for not one interception a game, but if he throws an interception, it's not the end of the world, not end all be all. But
But it is if he only throws the ball 22 times a game,
I agree.
If he's throwing the ball
His yardage,
25
yeah.
times a game and he throws an interception, he's not gonna score a lot of fantasy
His
points.
yardage could definitely be down, but his touchdowns will go up. Like, they're not just gonna run it in every
All of
single
those
time.
guys can score touchdowns, though, and he's not a rushing quarterback, so it's
He ran for a
like
lot of
all
touchdowns. He has rushing upside. Like, at the end of the day, again, he has not been utilized to his full strength either.
Yeah, he definitely has some rushing upside. I mean, he has more rushing upside than like CJ Stroud, at least at this point. But the reason why I still have CJ Stroud above a guy like Herbert is because I'm that much more confident in CJ Stroud's abilities as a quarterback in the NFL. I mean, that's why I have all these guys above Herbert. Herbert's my quarterback 16. I still have Brock Purdy and the incoming rookie Cam Ward ahead of Justin Herbert because I'm more confident in Brock Purdy's capabilities of running an offense, and I'm excited for what Cam Ward can bring to his organization that he goes to. That I don't get excited over with Herbert and the Chargers because I think it's almost a plug and play situation for Jim Harbaugh.
Right. We'll see. I mean, we'll see how their defense fares on a game to game basis, but with his rocket arm, and in my opinion, he does have rushing upside. I think Herbert's just going to be great, especially with a great offense. It comes a lot of touchdowns. Touchdowns, obviously, you'll have a lot of positive and negative regression on a year to year basis because there's so much luck involved. But if it's a good offense, I'm willing to bet on that. But looking at a couple other guys in this tier, we had after Jordan Love at 14, or actually at 13, sorry. We also had Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy, and Dak Prescott ending off this tier. Now, these are all guys that I had in my fourth tier, except for Kyler, or no, I did have Kyler Murray in this tier. And I think these are all very solid options. They all could have an argument, in my opinion, for being the number 11 quarterback or number 12. They're guys that are
Mhm.
signed to franchise long deals. They, are considered a star quarterback by some people out there. There's somebody out there that really likes these guys. And I think what really separates some of these guys from the guys below them is the rushing upside. So looking at Kyler Murray, I'm not the biggest fan of him. I have him at quarterback 17. We have him in our list at quarterback 14, I believe. I just I
Yeah,
just
because I
I
have
just have
him
no
11.
belief in him as a player to be like a successful player in the NFL. I think he could be out of the league in a couple of years, or not out of the league, but not being kind of passed around as a bridge quarterback, you might say.
I definitely agree with you. Kyler Murray is the worst quarterback out of this tier. You know, we're talking about Herbert, Love, Murray, Purdy, and Prescott. Kyler Murray is far and away the worst quarterback out of this tier in general. But it just is once again, Kyler Murray has shown us what kind of fantasy quarterback he can be, and he has the potential to be a top 5 quarterback in points per game with the way that he plays football. And he might not be in the NFL all that much longer. You know, he's a small guy. I agree with you. I'm not confident that he is the Arizona Cardinals starting quarterback long term, but I am confident that when he is the starting quarterback, I'm confident in putting him in my lineup and that he has the ability to score a lot of fantasy points and a lot more than the rest of this guys in this tier, even if those guys have more safety in terms of job
I
security.
mean, his potential is high on a game to game basis because he can run, but it's like he also it's not like he's trying to run every single time. It's not like
He
that
he is
for
an
him.
elite runner, though. I mean, when we're talking about running quarterbacks, we're talking about Jaden Daniels, Lamar,
No.
Jalen Hurts, and then
No,
Kyler
I
Murray.
don't think that Kyler Murray is in that tier. He's really fast. You could say he's as fast as them, but he is not that as dynamic of a runner. You don't see design runs for Kyler Murray. You see him
You
scrambling.
100% do.
No. No.
Oh
You
my
can't
god,
run him
in
up
the
the
red
middle.
zone
He's
especially.
way too small. You can't do design plays for him. He's not that type of quarterback.
Yeah, he doesn't run a quarterback draw up the middle, but he definitely runs bootleg runs all the time. They're always optioning. Like, the option is huge in his game, and
A bootleg is a play
they
action
use it in the red
pass.
zone so much. I understand, but sometimes they bootleg him out as a play action without even any receivers in the area just for him to run. That happens all the time. It happens on 2-point conversions all the time. They use him for everything
Sure.
on the
I
goal
mean,
line.
that's fine. I would not consider him in that tier because he just is not as dynamic of a runner. Teams do not fear
Oh,
him.
he's one of the best players at optioning a defensive
T
end.
Okay, okay. Option, I think I actually do think he is a good option quarterback. Again, though,
He's so
not in the
jittery.
same tier as Lamar or Daniels, in my opinion, and Allen for that
Uh,
regard.
he is a better well, okay, Allen and him are that's a tough debate to have in terms of who they are as a running quarterback, as a runner, because they're completely different players as runners. Like, that would be comparing, you know, Derrick Henry to, a tiny Austin
It's
Eckler.
just
Like, it
who's
just doesn't
more
happen like
effective.
that.
Josh Allen is a better runner than Kyler Murray. He gets more yards. He's able to be used in a lot more scenarios. He's a better runner. That's what it is.
Right, and tell me that Derrick Henry is better than Christian McCaffrey, like, I don't know, it's apples and oranges. I don't
I
think
don't
Josh
know if
Allen is
it's
a better
apple and
runner than
oranges
Kyler
though, because
Murray.
I think there's an argu if we're okay, are we talking McCaffrey healthy? Yeah, McCaffrey healthy might be a better player than Derrick Henry.
I'm just trying to give it an analogy in terms of you can have 2 guys play a position completely differently and still have like an effective way of using them as a runner. Like, Kyler Murray, I think, is a better runner and more effective of a runner than Josh Allen, even though Josh Allen can go up the middle of the field, but Kyler Murray can't. But Josh Allen isn't as fast as Kyler Murray. If they're running straight line 40s, like, Kyler Murray is gonna beat him by 0.2 of a second.
I really have not seen anything from Kyler's run game anytime recent. I mean, you forget that he also tore his ACL, not this past season, but the season before. Like, he's just not as explosive as he used to be. That's just my opinion. But I'm anti Kyler. I always have been. I would rather have a guy like Purdy over him and Dak because I trust their offenses. Purdy, especially, is usually going to be airing the ball out. Throws a lot of deep passes. He does get a lot of runs. He likes to scramble a lot. So he doesn't get the design runs, I agree. But I think those guys, I do have Kyler in that fifth tier, and it's just the lack of belief in him as a player. But
Purdy's really interesting because I gotta see the contract. I need the confidence that he's gonna be with Kyle Shanahan long term because that is what does it for me for Brock Purdy is I know that if Brock Purdy were to go somewhere else, I still think he'd be pretty good because I think he's a really good quarterback, but I don't know if he's had the crazy fantasy output as what he can do in San Francisco. I mean, with the weapons that they have had and the offense that Kyle Shanahan produces, I love it, and I'm totally willing to put Brock Purdy ahead of Kyler Murray with you. I just need to see the contract first.
Yeah.
I need to see him get a deal done. I need to see him there for 4 or 5 more years to make sure that I feel comfortable
Oh,
about it.
absolutely. If he doesn't get a contract, I'm moving him lower, but that's with the assumption that the contract will work out. But let's get on to our fifth and final tier here. We got 4 players to close it off. Cam Ward starting off this tier. I had him at my number 20 spot. You had him a little higher at 14, actually, so a lot higher. I'm confident in Cam Ward. I don't know what the landing spot's going to look like. If he goes to Tennessee, I'm not exactly sure how much I love him over these other guys because I think it could take him at least 2 seasons to be a productive fantasy quarterback in terms of like someone that's worth the value that you paid for him. But even the guys below him that we have here, Baker Mayfield coming in at 18, JJ McCarthy coming in at 19, and Jared Goff coming in at 20. Like I think all 3 of those guys could easily outscore Ward these next 3 years or next 2 to 3 years.
They probably will. Yeah, they probably will. I mean, the thing is with Cam Ward is from watching him at Miami, I mean, he was a Heisman candidate. He had an incredible season this past year where he put the Hurricanes on his back. Like genuinely, their defense was garbage. They had too many close games where Cam Ward had to just get themselves out of huge problems. Like their offensive line wasn't even that good this year, and obviously like Shedeur had a worse offensive line, and we're
Mhm.
not even talking about Shedeur because you and I are not very high on him at all. And I see Cam Ward as a completely
Well,
different
yeah.
prospect where I think Cam Ward can make so many more throws and can use his legs to extend plays similar to how Caleb Williams was playing the game and it did look somewhat similar where Caleb Williams how he played at USC they were also in close games. The defense was breaking down. And I do think Cam Ward barely got out of Heisman contention and being this elite prospect because they just lost a few important games down the stretch and they weren't viewed as like a high powered team in general. And I think that in this prospecting process in the NFL draft, I mean, I think Cam Ward's going to go first overall.
Right.
I think he will be a Tennessee Titan. I think he will be used as he should be in the NFL because he's a really good athlete and that's what bumps him up at least for me in terms of I want to get shares of him and to do that you got to put your money where your mouth is and say that he's going to come out and perform. Now, totally agree with you in this next year especially. He's not going to outscore Baker Mayfield. I mean, we are doing a disservice having Baker Mayfield all the way down here. Didn't he finish as the quarterback 6?
I'm not feeling that bad about Baker Mayfield being this low with with Liam Cohen leaving and Godwin
I
most likely
know.
set to hit free agency. The Bucks are going to hit a lot of regression. I know you're high on the Panthers in that division. I think Atlanta with year 2 of Penix could be interesting. Like I'm not very high on the Bucks to have a great season this year. I could see Baker having a little bit of regression. I'm a little bit more interested in the other 2 guys. JJ McCarthy is a guy that I'm very high on. Now I have him 19 on my list, but top 10 pick. He went 10th overall last year. He was a very talented quarterback. He won a national championship. He is a guy that has been seen to have all the talent and all the intangibles, but he's a little bit raw as a prospect. And I trust nobody else more than Kevin O'Connell to help him put that together with a receiving core like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson. So I'm think that JJ McCarthy is a huge steal in terms of an upside play. He also has rushing upside. He ran a lot in college. And so I think if you're looking
Yes,
for
he
a
does.
guy outside the top 10, he might not be great that this year. It's going to be his rookie year coming off a torn ACL, but I do really think that he's going to be in a great system and he's a good player, so he has a lot of upside moving forward.
I am very worried about JJ McCarthy as a prospect. When I watched him, I saw a lot of similarities to Sam Howell. And the way that the Michigan Wolverines ran their offense compared to me very similarly to how Sam Howell played with at UNC with Javante Williams and when they had what was the other UNC running back there that's now a backup running back in the NFL.
You're not talking about Hampton, are you?
No, 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 not
Oh,
Hampton. It was Javante Williams. They had a two-headed backfield in college at UNC. It was Javante Williams and, the other running back.
we'll think of it.
Um,
Charlie will flash the name on the screen, but I can't
but,
remember either. I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember.
but I think JJ McCarthy has some worries in terms of as a prospect, I was uncomfortable with what he was asked to do because I didn't think he was asked to do enough with the Wolverines to make me view him as a glowing prospect. And I think he ended up getting overdrafted with the Minnesota Vikings. The only problem is Kevin O'Connell's a great coach, so maybe he can figure things out. And you're totally right about that running upside. But I'm just particularly worried about him holding the ball too long in the NFL and not being good enough at making the more difficult throws to the outside of the numbers that I felt like Sam Howell wasn't capable of doing. And so Sam Howell got into a lot of trouble where he was throwing for a lot of yards in the NFL, but it wasn't producing points. It wasn't getting to where once the defense and they get closer to the red zone and the defense can kind of close in a little bit more and they don't have to worry about the back end as much and it closes down that middle of the field a little bit more. That's where we saw issues with Sam Howell's game. And I'm a little bit worried that we're going to see that in JJ McCarthy as well.
Right. I mean, you definitely have those issues. He has stuff to work on. Like I said, he's a raw prospect, but I'm willing to bet on the
Oh my God,
situation.
Michael Carter.
And right, Michael Carter, totally forgot. Yeah. I mean, that kind of makes sense because he was a receiving back, so that was a pretty good backfield. But McCarthy is I'm believing in it. I'm believing in the talent, and I think O'Connell can help him move forward. But I'm curious about this. You had Jared Goff at quarterback 22. I had him at quarterback 16, and that's zero rushing upside. He just turned 30, so his age isn't great either. Ben Johnson leaves Detroit, but Jared Goff, back-to-back seasons as a top 7 fantasy quarterback. The year before that, he was the fantasy quarterback 10. So 3 straight top 10 seasons. I don't understand how you can't have this guy in your top 20 when he is still retaining all of his weapons.
It's all those things that you mentioned though in terms of Ben Johnson's leaving. I'm not comfortable with his age in general as a dynasty quarterback because you're getting just mid out of him. You're not getting the rushing upside. And then on top of that, I think the Lions are due for regression. Whether you like it or not, I think they're going to regress to the mean. They scored 70 touchdowns this past season, which was an absurd number because in the year prior, they only scored 58, which was also an incredible offense. Like they were viewed as the best offense in the NFL in both those years. And he was a great fantasy quarterback, but he wasn't elite. And that was an elite offense that he was in. And I don't even know if they're going to score 58 touchdowns next season. I would, if they score, 45, 50 touchdowns, that's still an incredible offense. That's still way above the means for a lot of NFL teams. And I don't know if that's going to produce good fantasy football numbers for Jared Goff.
I'm just willing to bet on him because he's going to throw for a ton of yards. Yeah, they could have regression, but they had 30 rushing touchdowns last year. I mean, Goff's passing totals, I don't think will go down that much because their run game was so dominant. They were up by so many points in these games that the game script also never favored Goff. And if you argue that the games are going to be closer and they'll hit regression, he might be a little bit worse in real life, but he might throw for a lot more yards than he threw for this year.
I am not buying that bullshit that the game script never helped Goff or never went his way because the Lions are ridiculous. They're crazy. Dan Campbell is insane, and they consistently always try to score. Now, that I think what you speak towards the game script not going his way is because the way that Dan Campbell coaches, they run the ball on 3rd and 6. They run the ball on 3rd and 7. They run the ball on 3rd and 5. That's what they like to do because it keeps the defense balanced and they have such a dominant run game. You're right, they scored 30 rushing touchdowns because that's what they do. It doesn't come off of Jared Goff's hand. He's not producing fantasy points for them. He's not producing points for them. He's
That's
just the guy
not
at the
true.
helm of this
That's
offense.
not
He
true.
doesn't deserve to be in the top 20 like this. He's getting older. I view him and Baker Mayfield extremely similarly.
Look, people would doubt Goff every
But
single
Baker
year,
runs
and then he
more.
comes back and finishes the top 10 quarterback. So that's fine. You don't have to have him in your even your top 20. But I'm just saying, when we come back to this a year from now, and you're like, oh, Jared Goff finished another season, even as a top 12 quarterback, it's just not going to be very surprising because again, he is a gunslinger and he might choke in a few games here and there. But again, we're talking about fantasy football here and it's about points scored. And he's going to
Finishing
be
top
able to
12.
put up a lot of points.
There's no way he finishes top 12 this year.
That's what I've been hearing for the past 3 years. So it'll just be another year. Yeah, you're right. Eventually, you're going to be right. There's going to be a year where he doesn't finish. I'm just going to have to keep having the same argument with somebody. But yeah, I mean, Jared Goff, if you have him, even he could in my opinion, you could put him as high as quarterback 12 on this list. Like I said, have him as quarterback 16, but you could easily argue him over some of these guys because he could easily be a great passer in this league for the next 5 years. But that'll cap off everything for this episode. We really hope that everybody enjoyed. We'll be coming out in the next few weeks with our other ranking videos for running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. Again, make sure to follow us on all of our socials at Leatherbrains. Like and subscribe our YouTube channel as well. We'll see you next week, and we're out.
3, 2, 1.
Got a blast!
Thanks for checking out the Fantasy Brains. Don't miss next week's episode, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. See you next week, Brainiacs.